Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It is Friday, November 28th, the Thanksgiving edition of the critique of the week. Hope everybody had a good one yesterday if you celebrate. Let's see. Who do we have in the house? We have Brian O'Sullivan is here. Hey, Brian. Danette Burmy is here. D. Coleman, Patty Arbor, CM Wynn. Let's see. L of Arcadium. Steve Horrell is here. Nancy Tunnell. M. Carr, we've got, let's see, CLAS, Mark Grenier is here, Shape of Soup, Katie Dozier, the next room over, Hammett Malik is here, good to see you, Hammett, Morgan Feeney, all right, well, good to see you all. Let's see, and make sure Facebook, yep, oh, Jackie Chow's over there on Facebook, all right, so... Let's see. We're going to start out. Let's see. Well, who out there has poems in the queue? If you got a poem in the queue right now and you're watching right now, please let me know. And let me know the name that it's under, too. Michael Antrobus has 2 in the queue. Jackie Chow's got a couple. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to do a critique of the week like we always do. And the way that works is we read poems, we talk about them. So all you have to do is leave as many comments as you can about the poems. Tell everybody what you think, what works, what doesn't, words that go, words that are off, sentences that especially sing. Anything you can pass along really helps to all the poets who are putting their poems up for critique. And if you'd like to have a poem critiqued, all you have to go to rattle.com, click on that critique of the week up in the menu bar, and you'll find the critique there. Let's see. And Holly Hopgood's got some. Okay, let's try to get to as many people as we've just mentioned. Let's go first. The first one I saw was Jackie Chow. We'll do Jackie Chow first. And Jackie Chow's got this. It is I who have rejected you. Okay, let's take a look at this by Jackie Chow. As always, leave as many comments as you can. This is that workshop experience. It's so valuable. We do it free right here every Friday afternoon at Rattle, helping people out, getting people, making people better poets, that we can all enjoy better poetry. It's always a wonderful thing, and I always enjoy it myself. Let's take a look at Jackie Chow. And Jackie Chow, an old friend of Rattle, Jackie Chow used to come to the Rattle reading series back when it was in person in La Cañada, Flint Ridge, at the Flint Ridge bookstore from Southern California. And let's take a look. Does Jackie have any questions, too? No specific questions. Let's just take a look at this poem that Jackie sent. It is I who have rejected you. And let me tip this. Hang on 1 second. Let me tip this down just a little bit. I think it's a little... okay. There. That's a little better. I felt a little low. I think at some point the camera dipped. All right. It is I who have rejected you. It is I who have rejected you, chivalrous knight. You have descended to the low sands and tossed pearls to the gulls. Shred your sandwich, O prince, bread and bologna. I am salivating, wet drool on my chin. What are these offerings of brick driveways and children? All I want is to fly away after the feeding. All I want are these scrolls. Let me write my poems forever. No white dress, no marriage vows. Yeah, so the first thing folks are saying, Rose Lenard is never keen on repeating the title in the first line. Yeah, and there's a way, so repetition can either be good or bad. Repetition always has an effect. That's one thing to think about. And if you repeat, and you repeat it in a way that twists and turns and makes us think more about what we originally heard, that is an expansive kind of repetition. But if you're repeating just to repeat, that's actually detracts from the power of the sentence. It makes it so literally become a little bit habituated to it that quickly, and it just doesn't have the impact it did if we would have heard it only once, actually. So it is I who have rejected you. I would come up with a different title or have it read right into the poem. So have the first line be chivalrous knight and then let it go from there. And the Shape of Soup says, often in the situation, I simply treat the title as the first line. Yeah. It is I who have rejected you, chivalrous knight. Yeah. Dry Montito says, some knights have to be rejected twice or they don't get it. Totally true. Okay. You have descended to the low sands and tossed pearls to the gulls. So with this poem to start out, I'm not sure how literal to take the metaphor, which is the first thing that's making it a little bit difficult to connect. Because the night could be a literal night or it could be a figurative night, and because it exists in a limbo, I don't have quite as much of a connection to the poem, and that's one of the things the title can do. Dick Westheimer said, if you put some kind of image or something interesting into the title that way, that can help lead you into how to take the poem. But our vid note says the metaphor is maybe a little mix between the gulls and the drooling chin. Yeah. Okay. The Shape of Soup says it's almost amusingly biting, almost. Anyway, let's keep reading. So you have descended to the low sands and tossed pearls to the gulls. Shred your sandwich, O prince, bread and bologna. So I like the bread and bologna. I think there's a contrast between the the chivalrousness, the formality of that aspect of the poem, and then to move to bread and bologna is kind of funny. I am salivating, wet drool on my chin. So at this point, I'm a little I'm wondering who I am. So often with these kind of poems where we have a direct address to somebody, I'm wondering who the I and the you actually are, and it makes it difficult to connect with a poem because we don't actually know. And here, so when I say I'm salivating, I'm wondering suddenly if it's written in the perspective of a squirrel or something. I know that's not the case, but I have that thought sort of clouds the rest of the poem and makes it so it's not as stark and striking. Yeah. So, shred your sandwich, O prince, bread and bologna. I am salivating, wet drool on my chin. Yeah, and somebody says, as Rose Leonard says, and drool always wet. Yeah, you don't really need wet drool because drool's always wet. So drool on my chin. What are these offerings of brick driveways and children? So with that, we're definitely leaning more towards it being figurative language at this point. But then all I want is to fly away after the feeding. So there's gulls, there's a knight, there's a prince, there's a sandwich, there's something flying away. It does feel like a lot is, a lot of the metaphors are mixed, and a scene plays out in my head, but it's, but it's muddled. It's sort of a mix of different images that don't really fit together. So, as Morgan Finney says, the speaker a seagull, and that's what I wonder. But then do seagulls drool? So I'm just sort of really at a loss for how all these sort of figurative language aspects mix together. What are these offerings of brick driveways and children? All I want is to fly away after the feeding. All I want are these scrolls. Let me write my poems forever. No white dress, no marriage vows. Yes, Kitty Scruggs. Galloway says the lines flow, but I don't get an honest feel for what the speaker wants. Yeah, and I just feel, it's muddled with how everything is mixed up. If you look at if there were a scene where, somebody was feeding gulls, to pick just one of them, and then that scene played out and became a metaphor for being rejected, then that is the kind of way that works. You kind of have to pick one and go with the one way so it can become vivid and fluid and evocative and memorable. And I think here, combining the night with the gulls, and then the night comes back kind of with scrolls, I would just much rather see a more direct address in the poem and carry through with one metaphor, Yeah. Let's see. Diamantita says, I think it is amusingly biting. Someone has offered the speaker the American dream. Marriage, HOA, PTA, bread and bologna. The speaker skewers the whole thing. Yeah. Yeah, that's the sense I get. But as Morgan Finney says, I need a sense of place or concrete image of who the speaker is. I just rather feel unmoored and lost. Yeah. And Dryman T also says the only stanza that doesn't land for me is the Scrolls Poems one. I feel like if that gets introduced as the alternate life at the end, it's got to be concrete Dickinson sharp. Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, so that's the issue of this poem. It's sort of jumping around, and I can really see, even if you wanted to paint it as a scene of a knight feeding gulls, as absurd as that is, mixing the two, you have to build an actual scene. And I really think focusing on one metaphor and running with that and seeing where that takes you is the way to go, and to make the poem come to life. And I think the feeding the gulls and having them pass on it is a better way to go with this. Okay, let's take a look. Jackie sent a couple. Let me take a look at the other one by Jackie. I believe it's just the next one up. Let me see. Yeah, this is Jackie Chow again. And this is the summer I sketched pictures of fruits and framed them. And we always do like to do a few poems, because that way we could get a sense of if it's a pattern or if it's sort of a one-off issue that the poet has. It's really good to know. And I think, clarity in an authenticity of voice, like tell the story through that one image is what we want. That's missing in this. The summer I sketched pictures of fruits and framed them. I started with apples, which were hard to get the shapes right. I have a bunch of paintings where they look like bell peppers. But the summer I sketched was a summer I had no job and no driver's license, where each day began with a brisk walk to the shopping center down the street from my home, the one with a green awning over a Vietnamese coffee shop that was always unpatroned during the daytime because everyone was working. And then there came the art class I paid for with my disability money that started with an apple casting a shadow on the table, then a watermelon slice in half, then a stalk of bananas, which I drew too curvy and looked more like plantains, which was the last sketch I did before storming out of the class in my loneliness. There were other such days, like when a video store owner recommended comedies to cheer me up, but for some reason they didn't sting as much as that summer I learned to sketch. So this one, because do you feel how much more we connect with this one? And it's because we get a better sense of the speaker and the authenticity of that voice in the actual story, which feels very true and real. And as Hemant Malik says, lovely details. And so this one it connects a lot better than the other one does. Let's see. So let's take a look more line by line. I think there's some you could trim down and make the poem a little shorter. I think Nancy Tennell is saying, I would like storming out of the class into my loneliness. I think the poem could end there, is what I was thinking. I think the main thing is that the poem goes on a little too far. And as Morgan Feeney says, this one feels like it turned its wheels a while before it got going, but was much better once it did. So I think trimming off some from the top and from the bottom will get to a much stronger poem. And this is I think the title sets the background really well in this poem. So the summer I sketched pictures of fruits and framed them. I started with apples, which were hard to get the shape right. I have a bunch of paintings where they look more like bell peppers. But the summer I sketched was a summer I had no job. I wonder if I think maybe we could cut, or maybe move this down. I like the detail, but I liked, the poem really took off when it got into the I voice here, where it was revealing about itself. And I think maybe I'd cut this line too. What if you started out and again read in for the title? The summer I sketched pictures of fruits and framed them was a summer I had no job and no driver's license, where each day began with a brisk walk to the shopping center. See, these are really nice details, really authentic. If we cut this out and just jumped right in there, the poem would grip us right away. Hang on. There we go. Okay. So with a brisk walk to the shopping center down the street from my home, the one with a green awning over a Vietnamese coffee shop that was always unpatroned during the daytime because everyone was working. this section, I think this works, but it's a little, it's not worth 6 lines. So I think this one we could condense that image and that idea to 3 lines. I think, we don't really need down the street from my home. We could say with a brisk walk to the shopping center, the one with a green awning, or a Vietnamese coffee shop that was always unpatroned because everyone was working. We could just cut that line and that line and condense it down. Yeah. So Shape of Soup says the title is nice. This poem has more of a tangible through line, but I think the author needs to spend more time shaping the through line. You're telling a story. You want it to matter to the reader. Yeah. And D. Coleman says about the first poem, or we're back to the first poem. You can check out the comments for more on the first poem. Yeah. Okay. But that's the way. I mean, we've already cut out half of the first without really the first section. We've cut out like half of the first half of the poem, and we haven't really lost anything, which strengthened. That's how much it strengthened. And then there came the art class I paid for with my disability money that started with an apple casting a shadow on the table. I really love this detail that it started, the apple casting a shadow on the table, then a watermelon sliced in half, then a stalk of bananas, which I drew too curvy and looked more like plantains, which was the last sketch I did before storming out of the class in my loneliness. There were other such days, like when a video store owner recommended comedies to cheer me up, but for some reason they didn't sting as much as that summer I learned to sketch. So whenever you had for some reason, and I think maybe I'm going to change my opinion of what I said in the initial. I was thinking at first, reading through, that you could just cut off the stanza and end, because it is a strong ending sort of rhythmically and ending with an image, ending is something that happens. It's a good ending in theory, but the poem doesn't really feel developed at that point yet. And I think anytime you have, for some reason, they didn't sting as much, for some reason is a clue that there's a deeper reason that you want to write about that you haven't gotten to yet. And I think what this poem really needs, we can jump in faster, like I said, but then instead of push deeper, go farther into this poem. And I think there's more to it. What is this reason? What else? And how do you get to what, if you have a sense that there's more to the poem, how do you do it? How do you get deeper into the poem? And the best advice, I think, is to sort of use it like a word association type thing. Sit with a poem, read it out loud, read through to that spot where you feel like you haven't gone to the conclusion yet, and then see what pops into your mind. What memory do you go to next? How does that daydream evolve? And usually that daydream is the subconscious telling you what it needs to be told. It's telling you how to get to that for some reason. And so keep following the thread, whatever comes out, and see what happens. And, who knows? I mean, if it, before storming out of the class in my loneliness, and then you think about a time you stormed out of class in 5th grade, like I stormed out in 5th grade when the teacher, blah, 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 and tell that different story, shift in time, go somewhere else. Yeah. And then, yeah. But feel free to jump like that. Or what does it remind you of? It's sort of like a word or an image association. Like push into something more with a poem. Yeah. Yeah. So M. Carr says, to piggyback on SOS, the inability to properly shape an apple and the inability to shape your own life, even the spending of money is on art class, is a clue. Yeah. It is interesting. People are talking in the chat, too, about everybody's handles, and they are different. They're showing, instead of showing just your names that you chose, I guess, to show them by, it's your actual YouTube handle. So Rose Leonard has a numbers after it, which is not usually the case. I don't know. It must be something that's different about YouTube. But anyway, I think this poem, there's a real emotional heart to this poem that's trying to speak. And I think we could keep going with it. And so just right to the spot and then go somewhere surprising. Like, let your mind wander, daydream, see what happens. And often that will be the revealing thing that shows you what you really want to write about, which you haven't gotten to yet. Like, why didn't the comedies cheer you up? Or why didn't they sting as much? Why did that sting more than anything else? And that's what, yeah. Yes, Petty Arbor says there's real feeling in this poem. Would like to see a revision, yeah. And more a development, I think. It's more development than a revision. But push farther into this one, because there is a lot there. Yeah. Okay, let's go to another poet. Who else was here? I think it was Shape of Soup. But who is Shape of Soup? I'm sorry, it's so hard to keep track of who the... Is Michael Antrobus Shape of Soup? I believe. Well, Michael Antrobus said they had poems, so... let's see, Antrobus. Oh, Shape of Soup's Michael Rolane. That's right. Okay. Well, we'll check out Michael Antrobus first. So Michael's got a couple of poems for us. No general questions. He's got Identification and A Cold Start. And Michael from Georgia. Okay. Let's take a look at this. This is Identification. Identification. In the hollow staccato of your forthcoming, Ani DeFranco sings I Mean As Is, as masking tape unreels with the sound of someone trying to scratch the back of their throat, as we roll out your room with V's and W's and a neutral yellow, as we want to keep your identity a surprise. Others speak of your arrival, but I feel you already curious, creative, open inside her, inevitable. The obstetrician tries to get me to identify you as Mom's view is blocked from the cesarean section. As you finally come out in a gush of amniotic celebration, the word gets stuck in my throat, so he aligns you one of two names we chose after careful deliberation, so as to be written upon your unamended birth certificate. After heart, breath, tone, and reflux are assessed in the warming station, after a heel prick test reveals nothing, a nurse wheels in a crib like a crash cart, leaving without a word, just you rinsed, swaddled, and the postpartum unit off to the side. At the foot of Mom's bed for 5 eternal minutes, or is it 3, you lay alone 6 feet away, stretched out long with your shock of red hair, as if you belonged to someone else. Tell me as you waken inside, as you snap together big bros Lego set with ease, as you donate your long curls, as you become known by a new name, as giggles stop bubbling up, as adolescence stalks, does love change? My greatest fear is that one day someone will ask me to come identify you. The time has come for a makeover. My faith rests in seeing you yellow as pollen scattered, because when I look around, I think this is good enough. And I've got no illusions about you. When I say I'll take it, I mean as is. All right, so those are lyrics from Ani DeFranco's As Is, reference at the beginning of the poem. And if you don't know, I interviewed Ani DeFranco for the Musician Poets issue a couple of years ago. One of my favorite, I think she's the best songwriter alive today. Although on the poetry space with Katie, we're going to be interviewing... Katie Dozier, that is, of course. We're going to be interviewing Frank Turner, who she thinks is the best songwriter alive, the British musician, coming up. Let's see. Yeah, so Abigail Cargo says there are some times where commas are used when they are grammatically would be, and others where they are not used. What is the difference? Should there be a comma after forthcoming? Yeah, I noticed a few of those. That is something to... With comma usage, consistency is what matters. If you want to break off from traditional use, then do that consistently. And if you're not going to do that consistently, then you have to do it consistently. And if you're not, then just follow it. You know, because it gets confusing. We expect it. There's a reason why punctuation exists, and that's to make the reading process easier, you know? Anyway. John Barlow says quoting lyrics is problematical, I've been told. In theory, I mean, really, the reality is it's just fair use. In a case like this, there's no way. There's a 4 factors of fair use test, or is it 5 factors? Well, listen, speaking of Poetry Space, we had a Poetry Space episode on that, on fair use. It's a really interesting topic, trying to balance artistic freedom and freedom of speech with the idea of copyright and ownership of our creative output. And that's what fair use does, or tries to do. But if you're quoting a few lines, I mean, everybody's afraid of it, but it's really just fair use. I mean, if you're adding to things, you're making a piece of art, you're referencing, you're not taking away from the money that Ani DiFranco was able to make by referencing this song. I mean, if there was any kind of lawsuit, which there never would be, about a use of a lyric in a poem like this, the judge would throw it out laughing, even if he were, no matter who was the lawyers. Yeah. But anyway, but I think there is something problematic about the way the poem ends, though, because it ends on such a long quote that it really, to me, sucked the strength out of the poem. I don't think it's a very strong ending because the quote goes on so much, so long. I would, the reference, to me, I would keep the reference to the song if you want, and let us sort of come to that. You're quoting the chorus of that song, and, if we look up that song, we'll see that. I don't think it adds a lot to the poem. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, PMB says, arguably Laura Marling might also be the best songwriter alive. It could be. Okay. Well, I had a little bit of trouble following the poem, so let's start on the very literal level. There's some great flow. There are great lines, really nice references, and a really nice rhythm. There's certain times where there's a repetitive rhythmic use that's really propelling the poem forward with a lot of energy. And I think that's the main highlight of the poem. Also, some really nice descriptions too in it. Yeah. And about the ending, I think Mary Carr, I think it's M. Carr, says, "It was very strong to me, but I felt duped when I realized they were not the poet's own words." I wonder. I think maybe I'd suggest just using that poem as an epigraph, like that quote, then not starting with Ani DiFranco. If you just had, if you had these 2 lines, and then attribute it to Ani DiFranco as an epigraph, we would sort of get the frame, get that you're going in that direction, and then we could just start out with a stronger thing too to start with, just as masking tape on reels with the sound of someone trying to catch back the throat. You could start there, and because the first 2 lines aren't really strong either. Katie Scruggs Galley says, "No, I love it as is." Okay, well, anyway. In the hollow staccato of your forthcoming, Ani DiFranco sings, "I mean as is." So the hollow staccato of your forthcoming, is that the childbirth itself? Sorry. I don't know. Anyway, to me, there's something sort of stilted about that first line. It reads clunky to me. In the hollow staccato of your forthcoming, Ani DiFranco sings, "I mean as is." But then it picks up as masking tape unreels with a sound of someone trying to catch the back of their throat. See, that's a really nice line. As we roll out your room with V's and W's and a neutral yellow with V's and W's. I'm not sure I follow that. As we want to keep your identity a surprise. Others speak of your arrival, but I feel you already, curious, creative, open inside her, inevitable. Okay, so it's the gender not being named. Yeah. The obstetrician tries to get me to identify you as mom's view is blocked during the cesarean section. As you finally come out in a gush of amniotic celebration, the words get stuck in my throat. So he assigns you one of two names we chose after careful deliberation, so as to be written upon your unamended birth certificate. So there's something very sort of formal and stiff about some of the lines here. You know, the same as the hollow staccato of your forthcoming. You know, as you finally, one of the two names we chose after careful deliberation. Like after careful deliberation, it's like such a, it's not natural to how people would say that it's how people would say it in writing and not in speech. And poetry is the music of speech. Yeah. And that V's and W's is a paint roller, like painting the yellow room, yeah. Which I didn't get at first, but then once that makes sense, then you can kind of go back and realize what that was about. As you finally come out in a gush of amniotic celebration, the word gets stuck in my throat, so he assigns you one of two names to each. So why does what word gets stuck in my throat? That's something that I found hard to follow too. Anyway, so he assigns you one of two names we chose after careful deliberation, so as to be written upon your unamended birth certificate. And again, so as to be written upon your unamended birth certificate is just a lot of syllables for not a lot of detail and a lot of sort of formal stiffness. And the poem is best when we have these as repetitions, and we have more down here when it's sort of riffing and using language. You see, even the sentences become shorter because this is a poetic mode you're in. It's a musical mode. And when we have these longer lines, you're writing from a different neurological space, which is not poetic. It's the music of prose instead of poetry, you know? And so, follow yourself and just pay attention to that and stick so much more with the poetry of it. Yeah. Anyway, at the foot of the mountain's bed, wait, where did we go? After heart breath, tone, and reflex are assessed at the warming station, after heel prick test reveals nothing. And here's a good example too, I guess. These two lines. This first line is written in that prose mode, in that left brain, in that already moduled world, in that, the way of writing an essay mode. After heart, breath, tone, and reflex are assessed at the warming station. Again, that's a real mouthful to say. And then we get into that, we repeat after, and the after shifts our gear into the other part of ourselves that's generating poetry. And then it becomes a run of rhythm and music again. And so it's really important to see the difference between these two. I know I'm lingering a lot. Everyone is talking about the topic of the poem, but it's really important to see the difference between these two lines. When I talk about reading through poetry submissions as being flipping through an old radio dial, and you hear static, 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 and sometimes you get to a talk station, you hear voices, and you're like, oh, there's information there, that's a voice. And then you keep going and hear music. And there's a huge difference between music and talk radio and static. And it's the difference between these two lines. And the real poetry is in these lines. And the prose is not poetry. And it's a matter of finding this gear and staying in this poetry generating space, whatever that mindset is. And that's where the poem actually lives, as a poem. And before that, it's a preconceived sort of concept that you're writing about like you would an essay, and the poetry is just not there. But it's really always interesting to see. It's the repetition. When we had the after the heart, or after heart, breath, tone, blah, 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 then we have after a heel prick test reveals nothing. That repetition kicks us into music, and then we're writing from music all of a sudden. And the lines get shorter, and the whole poem gets more musical. The nurse wheels a crib like a crash cart, leaving without a word, just as you rinsed, sat swaddled in the postpartum unit off to the side. That a nurse wheels in a crib like a crash cart. Like listen to the music of that. A nurse wheels in a crib like a crash cart. The voice that wrote this sentence is not the same voice that wrote this sentence. And this sentence is the poetry sentence. Do you see? And we sort of, in so many poems and submissions, you see shifting in and out of these gears, where the poem comes from and how it's that creative musical space versus the cerebral, it's the willful will that I talk about too, from Zen and the Art of Archery. When you're aiming too hard, you're trying too hard, that's when you miss the target. It's having a completely relaxed, receptive position where the poetry is flowing. It's the flow state. You hit the flow state and music and poetry flows out, and then you leave the flow state and it's not, and then you get back in, and so many poems just go in and out of that. And when we talk about finding too a consistent voice as a poet, what it is finding the voice of your flow state and being able to enter and stay in that flow state. And that's when we have the voice that we are. So as you're reading your poems, listen for the voice. Listen, just read them out loud and feel where it's fun to read out loud. Okay? After heart, breath, tone, reflex are assessed at the warming station, it's not fun to say out loud. But after a heel prick test reveals nothing, a nurse wheels in a crib like a crash cart, leaving without a word. That feels fun to say. And so write in ways that feel fun to say. Anyway, it's just an important point, so I wanted to overemphasize that. But we'll keep going. At the foot of mom's bed for 5 eternal minutes, or is it 3, you lay alone 6 feet away, stretched out long with your shock of red hair. Again, we're getting these shorter lines because we're feeling the music here. We're riffing on language itself. Stretched out with your shock of red hair as if you belong to someone else. Tell me as you awaken inside, as you snap together big bros Lego set with ease, as you donate your long curls, as you become known by a new name, as giggles stop bubbling up, as adolescence stalks, does love change? And so it is a gender assignment and then a gender transformation surgery or identity shift. My greatest fear is that one day someone will ask me to come identify you. The time has come for a makeover. My faith rests in seeing you yellow as pollen scattered. So, and this is a really nice line too. Seeing you as yellow as pollen scattered. I mean, there's wonderful lines of poetry. And I think what the poem really wants to do is keep going. There's a little bit more, there's a comma here. And I think there's an impulse to say a little bit more. My faith rests in seeing you yellow as pollen scattered as something. There's more to that image or another place to go right there. And I think that's the real ending of the poem. A small thing, but yeah, I agree with Mary Carr. The brobo keeps being hard to read. And I think if you hyphened it, bro, it would be a little easier to read. Somebody's saying, who was it? Danette Burmia says, I would like this to end after identify you. Where's the identify you? Oh, there you go. My greatest fear is that one day someone will ask me to come identify you. The time has come for a makeover. My faith rests in seeing you yellow as pollen scattered. See, I really like this line, and I think it wouldn't quite be satisfying to just end there. There's more to say, and I think we start to say it. I think there's an impulse to say it, and then I think sort of Ani DeFranco in the preconceived idea of what the poem was going to do sort of short-circuited what the poem was about to say, which would have been a great line. So very similar to the last advice, read the poem through, and I would take this quote, just make it an epigraph. Cut the first couplet and just have the epigraph instead. Jump right in, but then read the poem through and see where your daydreaming goes after this line. What's the next image that comes to mind? If you just let yourself be receptive to the experience that you're having while reading this poem to yourself out loud, what's the next thing that comes up? And I think that's probably the end of the line. PMB says, what is the significance of yellow? I mean, yellow is being non-binary, is not being the pink bedroom or the blue bedroom. Yeah. And Mark Greener says the speaker is the father, I think. I thought that was a sibling for some reason. Did I imagine that? I don't know why I imagined it that way. There must have been a line that made me feel like that, but maybe it is the father. As Morgan Feeney says, I'm not sure I like ending with yellow pollen. There might be ideas of yellow as in cowardice, but I don't feel it fits for. I wouldn't end with a yellow. I think I'd follow that riff. You know, I think there's something that wants to come after the comma, and see what that is. Hammett says father. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, let's take a look at the other poem. So I think there's a lot to work with that, and a lot of great lines too. I like a bunch of it. Okay, let's take a look at the other one. A cold start. On a very cold day, still thick with a surrender of dark, the mind awakens without alarm. Street lamps throw beams at lawns, turning frost into crystalline constellations with the twinkling of our movement. Worn parts want more time. The aging set in their ways. We must rise earlier than ordinary and crack frozen locks meant to control entry on stiff glass doors that unfold like sentries granting access to new minds. Diesel gels. It sticks like cholesterol to artery walls, a kind of malignant wisdom ready to burst. Now stalled like a farm horse that succumbs to inspection, each hoof, each switch, each latch, each time glow bulb lit, pedal prodded. It comes to life with a whinny. It has taken centuries to get here clocking time. Loose latches slip, window springs chirp, sighs to catch a breath, skin sheaths on 12 rows of seats weathered, cracking, awaiting their arrival with wet folded wings, their innocent deceits as light and transparent as dragonfly wings, their DNA littered with debris of distant ancestors who cut new teeth and ask, "Can you whistle?" and tell their peers everyone thinks you're weird. To Ava in her knit hat and scarf, who enters like a marching band, I say, "You are a force of nature." "Mr. Mike," she says, "I like nature." They accumulate splintered pencils, crayon pieces, paper nibbles mixed with spit, mischief, laughter, empty wrappers, disciplinary slips, all deposited in the same capsule. Between the wall panel and seat cushion, they say one day they'll drive themselves. Each year dims in hue, grows in sophistication, like smeared moth dust shows us what ought not to be touched, and depart on the wind, leaving me behind scattered and absorbed aboard an old yellow school bus. Well, I love, there's an energy to this, and there's a lot of just substance. There's a lot of, things that feel so tangible and concrete. And so I really like that aspect of the poem. Yeah, a great rhythm to drive to it, yeah. Lots of music in these phrases, says Nancy Tennell. And it comes to life with a whinny, great line, yeah. Yeah. So this is a much more fun poem to read of the four we've seen today. A little bit of, again, I think the main takeaway, and this poem we talked about with the last poem, that letting the music, which is the creative side of the area of your brain, or it's actually many areas that are mixed together in a certain way to make things spontaneously, creatively emerge. You can see that flowing out a lot more in this poem, where it was like in spits and spurts in the last poem. This is mostly in that voice. The other thing that seems between the two poems that would make the poem stronger is just a little bit more clarity of like the situation, which is just something that we say all the time, but it is just so true. When you know where we are and what's going on, you don't have to be guessing and playing that. You're not devoting, as a reader, your mental space to just figuring out where we are. And so then you can connect more quickly and completely with the voice of the poem, which is really the point. We're trying to understand, hear the story, and feel the emotional weight of it, see the world in a little bit of a different way. And that's what we want to do. And if we have to figure out where we are in the poem, it's just brain function in the reader that's misplaced. And so there's a little bit of lack of clarity in both the two poems, where you can sort of piece it together by the end and you kind of get what's going on, but you're flailing around more than you have to. And I think that pulls away from the impact that the poem has. So let's take a look at like how we can clarify and see what we're missing. A cold, because I really love, and it did take off, a couple stanzas in, it really, there's a nice ending too. A cold start. On a very cold day still, thick with the surrender of dark, the mind awakens without alarm. Street lamps throw beams at lawns, turning frost into crystalline constellations with a twinkling of our movement. See, we don't know who the R is. And if we did, this whole thing would make a lot more sense and be a lot more clear. And that could be explained in the title. We could figure out who we are by letting us know. I mean, I think the whole time, my interpretation is that the we are the children. I think it's a bus driver seeing the new children come through every day. And so the very cold day is thick with surrender. It's when the driving around with the frost on the lawns, picking up kids is my imagine, or that's how I interpret it so far. Maybe I'll change my mind as I reread again. But worn parts want more time. The aging set in their ways. We must rise earlier than ordinary and crack frozen locks meant to control entry on stiff glass doors that unfold like centuries, granting access to new minds. And so this is really interesting, assuming my interpretation was correct, that this is the doors are the doors of a school bus, those stiff glass doors that unfold like centuries. You can see that. It's really it's a great image. But we're really abstract in these first two stanzas as far as what's going on. If we knew already that that's what we were talking about, we'd appreciate those lines so much more. But instead, worn parts, but we don't know worn parts of what. Want more time, the aging set in their ways. Instead of like realizing that we're figuratively talking about the school bus aging, we're wondering if we're going in a different direction, So just grounding us and situating us more in the poem just makes it work a lot better. We must rise earlier than ordinary and crack frozen locks meant to control entry on stiff glass doors. So the we here, I guess, is the school bus drivers. It's a little bit hard to follow. The R in the we and who the speaker is. Like, let us know what that is, and then we can see all this a lot more clearly. Diesel gels, it sticks like cholesterol to artery walls, a kind of malignant wisdom ready to burst. Now stalled like a farm horse that succumbs to inspection. See, that's really nice. Each hoof, each switch, each latch, each time, glow bulb lit, pedal prodded, it comes to life with a whinny. Very nice, and the rhythm really picks up here. It has taken centuries to get here, clocking time. Loose latches slip, window springs chirp. Sighs to catch a breath, skin sheaths on 12 rows of seats, weathered, cracking, await their arrival. With wet folded wings, their innocent deceits as light and transparent as dragonfly wings. Their DNA littered with debris of distant ancestors who cut new teeth and ask, can you whistle? And tell their peers, everyone thinks you're weird. I don't know. So is this like the same bus? Has the same, children and grandchildren of the people who used to ride the bus before. I think that's a really interesting concept. It's just that the slight lack of clarity just keeps it from being really, really great, I think. And we to Ava and her knit hat and scarf, who enters like a marching band. That's great. I say, you are a force of nature. Mr. Mike, she says, I like nature. They accumulate splintered pencils, crayon pieces, paper nibbles mixed with spit, mischief, laughter, empty wrappers, disciplinary slips all deposited in the time capsule between the wall panel and the seat cushion. That's great. They say one day they'll drive themselves. Each year dims in hue, grows in sophistication, like smeared moth dust shows us what ought not be touched. Like smeared moth dust shows us what ought not to be touched. That's another line I'm not sure I understand. And depart on the wind, leaving me behind, scattered and absorbed aboard an old yellow school bus. Yeah. Yeah, the time capsule. Yeah, so it's all this really needs is it's just a little more grounding, so we know where we are. And I know it's kind of fun to reveal it with the last line. But it's fun maybe for the poet more than the reader. Like, no, it's very often, or very rarely, I should say, where you come to an end and you're like, oh, oh, that's what it is. Now I know what you were talking to me about for the last page and a half, and I'm happy that you were withholding that from me the whole time. Just let us know. Like, trust, and part of it, I think, is having trust in your voice and you being interesting as a writer. We can know that it's a school bus, and that's what we're talking about. Yeah. Abigail Carger says, I feel like the last line reveal relates back to last week's discussion about riddle poems. It does. So go back. We talked about it yesterday. But if the riddle is what we have, like nobody, it's not really a fun experience. Like, I'm trying to think of a poem as I talk where the last line reveals what we're actually talking about, and then and that's enough of an interest to make us say, oh, I'm glad it was withheld the whole time. We don't want it withheld. We want to know, and then we want the experience of it, and we want to be connected to it. And if you're withholding what you're actually writing about until the very end, we're just not connecting as much as we could, and then we feel like, another part of it too is it's so much of what we're drawn to about poetry is authenticity, is honesty, and is truth. And that authenticity, it feels like we're on board with you, we're riding along, thinking you're telling us the truth as a narrator that we can trust, and you're whispering in our ear about life and it being true. And then you're saying, oh, the whole time I knew what I was talking about, but I held it back. It feels like a cheat, kind of. It feels deceptive. And I think I think we miss a lot. And just put it up front. Let us know what we're actually talking about. Then we can enjoy it the whole time. Then the other aspect which folks are talking about is just the clarity of the we and who we actually is and who our actually is. Like, is it all the school buses? I mean, that could be when you're revealing that it's a school bus, you can be showing us that you're speaking for all school buses collectively, or like school bus drivers, or whatever it is. But the we feels like it drifts around who the subject of that we actually is. Yeah. As Rosenart said, those endings assume the reader is going to reread it with the knowledge in the end line, which is a big ask. Yeah. And it's especially a big ask when it feels like it's been withheld from us just coyly the whole time. Like, we want the discovery, but discovery, there's no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. No tears for the writer, no tears for the reader. We want to experience what you're experiencing. That's what we're actually doing with poems. So get that out front and let us know what you're actually writing about. Okay, let's do one more poet before we end today. And let's see. Michael Rolane was here as well. We're just doing all poets who are here today. Okay. So this is a submission by Michael, Shape of Soup, from about a month ago. Michael from Georgia again, another Georgia poet. Mike says, hey, Tim, once again, I have two poems that I think pair well thematically, though their approaches are distinctly and hopefully interestingly different. Open to any individual critique, of course, but I'm also curious how they interact as a pair in tone and impact. Okay. So nicely not revealing what they're about, but asking for a frame of looking at it. Let's take a look. Inheritance. And I'll just skim. So Inheritance is like this, about 2 pages of short lines. And the second poem, Becoming, which is somehow connected to it, is about 1 page of short lines. Okay? And this inheritance in sections. Inheritance. 1. 2 weeks ago, I fully grasped the bare handle of a cast iron pan. I can't find the scar, so I might do it again. 2. You towered over me, our wound block ablaze, your back to flames to shelter me. 3. You say these nosebleeds are the shunt. Sorry, I have the hiccups. You say these nosebleeds are the shunt draining excess fluid from my brain. My brother was a pianist too. Her melody drew you in. The memory of her remains a missing coda for my silence, dripping, relieving the pressure. 4. A curious toddler left unobserved. I decided a whisk I've acquired belongs inside an outlet. It fits. I scream and she lifts me up. I scream until you return. 5. German winters mean real snow. Hide and seek behind thin white curtains. Powdered eggs. A shivering new friend. I tell you her name, Alexis. You smile and say we should go. 6. I wake from surgery giddy, pain shifted successfully from surface to sensory, your hand upon my shoulder. 7. You tell me stories to comfort us both. A skin knee for Kennedy, the kangaroo that won. I believe them. 8. 6 months ago you fell, slipped back to Korea, brought back the scars you'd left in a trench. I asked to borrow them. You insisted I had my own. 9. I'm 4. We left our cat asleep in the sink. The plane escapes the runway. You hand me a stick of gum. You say it will help. It does. 10. The scar that remains has stretched threefold. I fear it will be gone long before me. Okay, so that is the first poem, Inheritance. So I guess these are things we inherit. A wand block is German for apartment building, says Ben Anderson. Thanks, Ben. I was going to have to look that up. Yeah. Okay. I'm just looking at the comments right now. Yes, Dry Matita says, until readers see who is talking about what, the poem is just a string of words. Words without story are so hard to remember, even if all is revealed in the last line. The readers have forgotten the poem. That's really well said. I think about the last poem, but yeah. But I think it applies here too. The progression, as Tom Bartlett says, the progression eludes me. Hammett Malik says, loving this. Our vid notes, who is actually Rachel Grieve, I think, right, says traumas from childhood. Yeah. And Rose Leonard says, is it progression or fragments? Morgan Phoenix says it feels a bit pointillist. I'm not seeing the connections. Maybe that is just me. That's the thing, too. And so inheritance is the topic. Then we get these little moments. I like the framework for that. You know, the most famous poem that obviously does something kind of like this is 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. And that is, it has these different sort of radical shifts in perspective in a way to imagine the symbolic and physical meanings of blackbirds, you know? And this is a little bit more stationary. It feels like it's one speaker the whole way through, and yet we shift a lot, jumping a lot in time. And I feel, so Lisa Seidenberg says, I feel like the numbering is breaking the rhythm. Why are they needed? I feel like that shows how distinct and discrete the leaps are in time. But I had trouble figuring out how to connect all the dots, as somebody else earlier said. Well, let me, should I read this one or should I read the second one next? Let's read the second one, then we'll go back to the first one too. Because the poet, Michael Rolane, wanted us to connect both and see how they work together too. So let's read this one too, and then we'll go back to the first. Becoming. I inhaled my lunch, a Publix cream cheese roll with cucumber and imitation crab, my customary treat for enduring the world. The errand, obtaining the little white pills to endure the world, to obtain more pills to endure the world. I'm filing away another layer of the fractured line, now risen to the tip of my left thumbnail. I've been documenting for months the steady climb, etched in keratin script. What do you call the shape of space where a scar used to be? I ask because this is the first space that dared to become something since I stopped tearing myself apart, gnawing, ripping imperfections away until there was nothing. That's right. So this one, there are nice leaps without the kind of numbering fracturedness of the first poem. Yeah. Hammett Malik said, I like the repetition in the second stanza, says Morgan Feeney. I really like the second stanza in ways I can't explain. Tom Barlow says Keratin's script is lovely. Yeah, there's a lot of nice things in this poem, too. Yeah. For the first poem, we're going to look back at the first poem. And Katie Struggs Gallery says, I think the title needs to hint at inheriting the pattern of choosing pain. Mother and child, is that it? I think we just need a little more hint to. I agree with Katie here that we need a little bit more of a hint as to how to tie these together, just so we go in knowing a little bit more. Inheritance is kind of vague. Bob the Builder says WTF is Keratin script. So Keratin being the nail was split, and it's as if there was like writing in the crack along the nail, and that's what's meant by Keratin script there. Mark Ritter says part 2 is addiction detailed, the product of the history outlined in poem 1. And MCAR says Becoming might be a better title for the first poem. I want to reread the first and see how, sort of with this whole topic swirling around, how they sort of play together, how much more we know at this point. So inheritance. 1. 2 weeks ago, I fully grasped the bare handle of a cast iron pan. I can't find the scar, so I might do it again. I think that's a really, really strong, powerful opening. You know, I mean, we really see that happening, and then, you know, the pain of that, and then not being able to find a scar, and then the surprise of, so I might do it again. You know, that's a really interesting, strong place to start the poem. 2, you tower over me, are one block ablaze, your back to flames to shelter me. And I do wonder who the you is at this point, but I'm ready to let it go. But the problem is the you the same every time? It becomes a little bit difficult to know where we are, you know. Anyway, 3, you say these nosebleeds are the shunt draining excess fluid from my brain. My mother was a pianist too. Her melody drew you in. So who's the you? Because I thought maybe it was the mother. Is it the same you every time? I mean, I'm just a little bit. I wish I had a little bit more than these fragments. My mother was a pianist too. Her melody drew you in. The memory of her remains a missing coda from my silence dripping, relieving the pressure. So this, I'm not sure how to make this. This is a little cryptic to me. You say, so I don't know who the you is. And then these nosebleeds are the shunt draining excess fluid from my brain. Is that actually true? Is there a shunt that drains fluid as a nosebleed? Or is that just what somebody lied and said at some point? And then we shipped it. My mother was a pianist too. Her melody drew you in. And again, I'm like, who is the you? It's the person who said this. Is this an honest you? Like, who is the, I don't know. The memory of her remains a missing coda. For my silence dripping, relieving the pressure. Tom Barlow says, is the you from whom the inheritance is gained. Yeah. 4, a curious toddler left unobserved. I decide to a whisk I've acquired belongs inside an outlet. It fits. I scream and she lifts me up until you return. So who is the she and who is the you? I mean, and I think I might. It might be important who the she and the you are, or it might not. Like, there's just really no way to tell. And I think it's a really strong section if it's just the first 4 lines and we just leave it hanging there. But screaming, we know the scream's coming, so. Oh, so Brian O'Sullivan was saying it's a linear narrative. There's a cast iron pan that seems to burn, and then there's a blaze in the second, and then the speaker is a shunt. I kind of thought there was a linear progression. Malk says child moves closer to the father. So is the you the father and the she the mother? Yeah, I don't know. Or is it inheritance itself? I don't know. German winters mean real snow, hide and seek behind thin white curtains, powdered eggs, a shivering new friend. So I don't know who the shivering new friend is. I tell you her name, Alexis. You smile and say we should go. And I don't know what to make of this one either. I wake from surgery, giddy, pain shifted successfully from surface to sensory, your hand upon my shoulder. Again, without knowing who the you is and how I'm supposed to take that, it's just hard to connect with that one. You tell me stories to comfort us both. A skin knee for Kennedy, the kangaroo that won. I believed them. 6 months ago, you fell, slipped back to Korea, brought back scars you'd left in a trench. I asked to borrow them. You insisted I had my own. Well, that's stronger. So is it? Yeah. So shape. Yeah. So it's the. Yeah. Mark Grinder says I don't think the identity of she is important. Yeah. The you seems to be apparent, says Mark Grenier. And Mike Verlaine himself here says yes, Tim, but I'm not sure which one he's referring to. But that's I guess my interpretation now. The you does seem like a father the whole time. Yeah, as 8 suggests. 9, I'm 4. We left our cat asleep in the sink. The plane escapes the runway. You hand me a stick of gum. You say it will help. It does. That's a touching little moment, too. 10, the car remains has stretched threefold. The scar that remains has stretched threefold. I fear it will be gone long before me. So is this maybe it is. About the Middle says it's more of a puzzle than a poem. Yeah, I mean, you see, we get that a lot, and it's really hard to connect with poems that don't tell you the whole story. We want to assume that the story is interesting and that our way of telling it is going to keep us engaged, not having to, piece it together is what the compelling part of the poem is. We have 2 weeks ago. I'm just trying to figure out though, if it is a linear progression, if there was because we go back in time though, don't we? It's at one of these points. So 6 months ago you fell, slipped back to Korea, and then I'm 4. I don't know. I feel like we move around time and it's not a progression. Brandon Sutherland says, if the poem is about putting scattered traumatic memories together, maybe it has to have a bit of puzzle aspect. So that's the thing is this, when you, the speaker, say you know who you're referring to is the you, and we don't. And that's the thing that makes it feel revealing. The fact that the details of how these connect together, if they're little anecdotes that are very clearly told, and we know what you know, and you're compiling them together, and they put together and form a puzzle by the end of the poem that means something more than the fragments alone, then that feels compelling and interesting as a poem. But if it's you withholding the details that you know but we don't, then that doesn't make it compelling as a poem. Another poet says, but what does it all mean? And Shape of Soup says himself is the author. The idea here, how memory, pain, scars, and experience are inherited, passed down. These are fragments of memory. The nonlinearity is a reflection of the nature of memory. Yeah, and I like that aspect to it, actually. It's just that by having the you and the she and not identifying who those are, in your memory, you know who she is. If you say she, it's a person that you've gendered specifically, which means that you know who you're talking about, and we don't. And having that withheld from us is a crucial detail to help us connect with what you're talking about. So let us know who the you is just in these memories. And even if it's just, like, who are you talking to also? Like, when it's you say it will help, it does. Is this a poem written to, I think the you is your father. I think consistently, I'm not sure. But if we knew that you were speaking to the father the whole time, and there was a reason it was written to the father, then we can appreciate that every time it comes across. But if it's not something, if you're telling us the story, or you're trying to even tell yourself the story, it's not directly written to the you, who I think is the father, then then why not say, my father towered over me, his back to flames to shelter me, like why withhold that we know what that is? Yeah, so Brian, someone says, yeah, that's fair. What I think the speaker doesn't know is how all the pieces fit together, but I agree that we could know who the characters are. Exactly, and that's really the thing. To think that these pieces, to say these pieces fit together and add to something more is a great use of mystery. Poems should have some mystery to them. They should have something that you can sort of go back to over time. But those specific, easy details that could be told really simply and are clear and just true, just facts. Like think of it this way: don't have the answer to a puzzle be a fact. Have it be something that couldn't be a fact. It's something harder to explain than a fact. Than a detail. If all it is a detail that you could tell us any time, that's not something that's satisfactory. Is from a reading perspective. But if it's something that we don't know how this fits together, and I don't really know how to articulate the reason why this fits together, but it kind of does, I don't quite understand it, then that's a thing that can be revealed in a puzzle-like way and really work. So, yeah. Let's see. Another poet says guzzles. And yeah, I think about like that. And if you look at there's a way, and maybe we should look at a great guzzle, and we're kind of past time, but if we looked at a really good guzzle, the way guzzles shift perspective, or the way 13 ways of looking at a blackbird shift perspective, they're ways, and let's just pull it up. I've mentioned it twice in the show. I don't know if the last time I've done this. I just want to look at the way that Stevens handles the different subjects. Okay, so this is courtesy of the Poetry Foundation. 13 ways of looking at a blackbird. Among 20 snowy mountains, the only moving thing was the eye of the blackbird. 2, I was of 3 minds, like a tree in which there are 3 blackbirds. The blackbird whirled in the autumn winds. It was a small part of the pantomime. 4, a man and a woman are one. A man and a woman and a blackbird are one. See here that there's no there's no subject confusion. I think there's I thought there were lines later, and maybe there are, where we have a she. Isn't there the stagecoach comes in later? I'll read more. 5, I do not know which to prefer, the beauty of inflections or the beauty of innuendos, the blackbird whistling or just after. And so the I in the poem throughout is a very clear speaker. But right now we have these fragments and images, but we don't have a sense of not seeing who the subject is. Icicles filled the long window with barbaric glass. The shadow of the blackbird crossed it to and fro. The mood traced in the shadow an indecipherable cause. 7, O thin men of Haram, why do you imagine golden birds? Do you not see how the blackbird walks around the feet of the women about you? And so here we introduce a you, but we're told it's O thin men of Haram. So we might not know what that means, but we know that's who the you is. I know noble accents and lucid and inescapable rhythms, but I know too that the blackbird is involved in what I know. 9, when the blackbird flew out of sight and marked the edge of one of many circles. 10, at the sight of blackbirds flying in green light, even the bawds of euphony would cry out sharply. So I don't know what bawds of euphony are, but it's still precise in its. There's no ambiguity. We don't not know who we're talking about. 11, he rode over Connecticut in a glass coach. Once a fear pierced him, in that he mistook the shadow of his equipage for blackbirds. And so here, this is where we have the he. And this is where it feels informed by the guzzle form, to me, where we can shift perspectives and move around the poem. But it's not like we're trying to piece together who the he is in every section and link them. It's shown in a way, I guess what I'm getting at is that we have a very distinct speaker, and the speaker is showing these sort of glimpses of things in the same way that Michael Rolaine's poem is doing. But there's no need, I guess, to tie the subject together because we have these glimpses. Like, who rode over Connecticut in a glass coach? Well, the man riding over Connecticut in a glass coach. Like the whole scene is like right there. If that makes sense, I'm being articulate enough. Anyway, 12, the river is moving. The blackbird must be flying. 13, it was evening all afternoon. It was snowing and it was going to snow. The blackbird sat in the cedar limbs. And so nowhere, even though these are very, very small, fragmentary, concise moments that don't, it's hard to sort of see how they fit together. We're never lost within a single one. In the little world that is each of these sections, each of these 13 sections, we never have a question like, who is she? And when the he comes through, it's only one he, and he doesn't matter in that way. Like he's just another blackbird or something. Like it's a person, And so that's why we never feel lost in this poem, even though we get that mysterious fragmentary effect that the poem we were looking at by Michael Rolane was doing. And so I don't know, I think maybe like use this as a model anytime that you're having this kind of attempt at writing fragmentary memory. Have 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird as the model, where we shouldn't be lost within, that this is a little world in here, these, each section. And as long as we're not lost within that little world, it works. And it doesn't matter that it's hard to see how they add up together, as long as we're not lost within that section. And you could even shift, given it that it's broken off into sections, you can use the model of the ghazal and allow yourself to move around subjects too. This could be he towered over me. This could be she says this. We could, as long as we know we're moving and that they're all discrete. But the problem is it's like in this place in between where we want it sort of to understand the consistency of the you and the she and the story and not. And I think that's the way to approach fragmentary poems like that. So I hope that made sense. Yeah. Yeah, so Brian O'Sullivan says, I feel like in Stevens, the numbered sections are almost self-parody. They work because it's so clearly something non-linear, humorously being edged into a linear form. Yeah. Petty Arbor says, Arthur Z uses fragment beautifully and has a book that explains it all. Oh, that's great. I wonder, I'm curious if you could summarize, does he say that kind of same thing, that the fragments should be sensible, self-contained, even though they're fragmentary? Anyway, well, thanks so much for participating. Hope this was useful. Those are two poems by Michael Rolane. Yeah. Mark says, I love a poet who always says, put a bird in it. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, that's going to wrap up the critique of the week for today. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. It was a lot of fun, as it always is. A lot of fun discussion, a lot of interesting poems. Thanks to the three poets who shared their work with us. Yeah. Now, coming up on the Rattlecast this week, the guest is going to be... The guest is going to be Jeff McCrae. So we published about, I think, 5 poems from Jeff. Maybe once every 4 years we get another poem from Jeff and Rattle. Starting with this wonderful poem called Jeopardy from issue number 23. Yeah, and he has a first book out, though, finally, after all these years. And it seemed like he should have a book a long time ago. But this is his first book, Kingdom Where No One Dies, which just came out. We're going to be really fun talking to him. Now, the prompt for this week was to... Let me just pull it up. The prompt was to write an ode to something personal to you without it becoming a personal poem, i.e. a poem that only carries meaning to a very select group privy to specific knowledge. In other words, have a poem about something personal, an ode to something personal, but don't have it be the kind of poem where, you have to be the mother who knows about what the mirror is or whatever, or the boyfriend to know what it's about. Make sure that we can all understand. And it's not a personal poem that's too personal to make sense of. That is your prompt for this week. The guest, once again, Jeff McCrae. In 2 weeks, we'll have Billy Collins looking at the list. That's a lot of fun. That's your Rattlecast coming up Monday, December 1st, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great weekend in the meantime. Once again, happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there, and we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.